discuss about trigeminal nerves. So what are trigeminal nerves? Trigeminal nerves is the most expansive cranial nerves in our body. It supplies the sensory innervation to the face, facial sinuses, and mucosa, and it also supplies motor innervation to the muscles of mastication. There are three branches of the trigeminal nerves. Superiorly, we have the ophthalmic branch here. And then in the middle, we have the maxillary branch. Both the maxillary and ophthalmic branches carries purely sensory information. Inferiorly, we have the mandibular branch. The mandibular branch carries both sensory and motor information. First, let us discuss about the ophthalmic branch. The ophthalmic nerve has most of its function extracranially. However, before it leaves the cranial cavity, it gives off a small branch called tentatorial branch, which conveys sensation. And then, the rest of the nerves travel to the superior orbital fissure into the orbit, and then divides into three further branches. Here is the anterior view of the skull. And then we can see here the frontal nerve. It travels along the roof of the orbit and gives sensory innervation to the forehead and upper eyelids via its branches called supratrochlear branch and then supraorbital nerve. And then we have the lacrimal nerve here, and it travels along the lateral part of the orbit and supplies sensory innervation to the conjunctiva, upper eyelids, and lacrimal gland here. The third branch is the nasociliary nerve here. It travels along the common tendinous ring and gives off long and short ciliary branches behind the eye. The long ciliary branches provide sensory innervation to the cornea, while the short ciliary branch provides sensory innervation to the internal eye structures and emerges from the ciliary ganglion. Next, let us talk about the maxillary branch. Similar to the ophthalmic nerve, the maxillary nerve has most of its function extracranially and innervates on it. However, it has a small meningeal branch which supplies the dura of the middle cranial fossa. And then, the rest of the nerves travel to the foramen rotundum in the sphenoid bone. In the floor of the orbit, two branches travel laterally. First, we have the zygomatic nerve here. It supplies sensation to the skin covering the cheeks and anterior temple, and it also carries autonomic information. Next, we have the infraorbital nerve here. It penetrates the maxilla on the floor of the orbit and emerges anteriorly via the infraorbital foramen. This supplies sensory innervation to the lower eyelids, upper lips, as well as the ala of the nose. We also have the nasopalatine nerves. It courses to the nasal cavity through the pterygopalatine ganglion to enter the spinopalatine foramen. The greater and lesser palatine nerves and pharyngeal nerves provide sensory innervation to the mucosal lining of nasal and palatine areas, and it also provides autonomics to the ganglion of the nasal, palatine, and pharyngeal glands. Next, we have the mandibular nerve. This is both a sensory and motor nerve, and it exits through the foramen ovale in the sphenoid bone. This also supplies sensory innervation to the meninges. However, in this instance, the meningeal branches diverges to the nerve outside the cranium and then re-enters the cranial cavity via the foramen spinosum. The meningeal branch receives sensory information for much of its dura in the anterior and middle cranial fossae. The rest of the mandibular nerves emerges from the cranium into the infratemporal fossa. The nerve to the medial pterygoid is purely a motor nerve, and it has branches that supplies three muscles, namely tensor villi palatini, medial pterygoid, and tensor tympani. The mandibular nerve has two divisions. First is the anterior division, which carries motor innervation to the face. branches of the three muscles which all contribute to the mastications are the temporalis, lateral pterygoid, and the masseter muscles. The next division is the posterior division and it also has branches. First is the lingual nerve, which carries general sensation from the anterior two-thirds of the tongue and transmits parasympathetic innervation to the submandibular ganglion, to the submandibular and sublingual glands. And it also carries taste sensation to the chorda tympani. Next is the inferior alveolar nerve. It travels within the mandible and enters via the mandibular foramen, traveling into the mandibular canal. It gives off small branches which perceive sensation from the mandibular teeth, and it also has a motor branch which supplies to the mylohyoid muscle. Lastly, we have the auriculotemporal nerve, which provides sensory innervation to the skin of the temple of the sides of the head, and it carries fibers from the lesser petrosal nerve via the optic ganglion to the parotid gland, providing it with parasympathetic innervation. So that's it for the trigeminal nerves, and I hope you learned a lot from me. Bye!